What are you doing here?
Moving in. Just got the keys. I'm unloading my car. You can see.
Let me see some ID.
I don't think I'm required to show ID.
Turn around, you're under arrest.
Leonard Hayes paused on the sidewalk, a heavy box in his hands, sweat beading on his forehead. He had been moving for hours, shuttling furniture from a U-Haul into his new Lincoln Park townhouse. The spring sun reflected off the brownstones, joggers waved as they passed, kids laughed down the street. Everything felt normal, except for the patrol car slowing across the street. Leonard noticed it immediately, a dark blue blur cutting into the peaceful scene, and a knot formed in his stomach. Before he could set the box down, a uniformed officer stepped out, hand hovering near his belt, eyes scanning Leonard from head to toe. "Excuse me. What are you doing here?" Leonard turned, placing the box down carefully. "Moving in. Just got the keys to Unit 6C. I'm unloading my car." The officer's gaze didn't soften. "Let me see some ID." Leonard felt a flicker of disbelief. "I don't think I'm required to show ID. I live here." "Turn around. You're under arrest." Leonard froze. For a second, he wondered if he'd heard correctly. Arrested? For what? Trespassing in his own home? That moment would ignite a firestorm that shook Chicago. Leonard Hayes, 52, a veteran law enforcement professional, had just been appointed superintendent of the Chicago Police Department 8 days earlier. He was the first black chief in the city's history. A man who spent decades studying, training, and writing policies to prevent racial profiling had just been targeted on his own doorstep. His own officer, badge no. 3492, had no idea who he was about to handcuff. "Am I being detained?" Leonard asked calmly, his hands raised slightly, showing no resistance. "What's the reason for the stop?" The officer, Ryan Bennett, 34, narrowed his eyes. Assigned to District 18, Bennett patrolled wealthy neighborhoods like Lincoln Park and Lakeview, where black residents made up just 12% of the population but accounted for nearly 3 times the stop rate compared to white residents. Bennett had a history. 6 complaints over 9 years, all involving black men. None had resulted in discipline. "You're in a high-value area," Bennett said, voice hard. "There have been multiple break-ins reported on this block." "I live here," Leonard said, gesturing to the townhouse. "Unit 6C. The keys are in my hand." "ID. Now." Bennett's tone carried disbelief and suspicion, the kind that Leonard had spent his life fighting to eliminate from police culture. Leonard considered speaking his real identity, commanding the officer to stop immediately. But he chose not to. Instead, he wanted to see how one of his officers treated a black man, without the shield of authority or privilege. This was not just an encounter. It was a case study in systemic failure. "Keep your hands visible," Bennett barked. Leonard complied. He slowly reached for his wallet, placing it on top of the box. "I'm not resisting. I just want you to see my ID." Bennett's hand moved toward his cuffs. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." A few doors down, Luz Rivera, the building's concierge, saw the scene unfold from the lobby window. His stomach sank. He had seen this before. Bennett stopping black residents, questioning them aggressively, and escalating encounters unnecessarily. Luz grabbed Leonard's lease paperwork, running up toward the street. "Sir, that's him. He lives here." Clara Bennett, a retired teacher, started recording from her window, her phone shaking slightly as she documented what she feared would be another wrongful arrest. Across the street, Omar Lewis, a software engineer, dialed 911, reporting a police confrontation. Leonard lifted his hands higher. "Officer, my wallet is in my back pocket. I'll retrieve it slowly." Bennett's voice was sharp. Keep your hands where I can see them. Leonard froze mid-motion, then spoke slowly. Okay. What do you want me to do? In that moment, Sergeant Naomi Clark arrived on the scene. Her eyes widened as she took in the situation. Bennett gripping the arm of a calm black man, witnesses gathering, and the tension building. Bennett, step back. Now. Bennett hesitated, confused. Sarge, I've got this. The suspect is refusing to comply. That's not a suspect, Clark cut him off. That's Superintendent Leonard Hayes, your boss. Silence fell on North Orchard Street. Bennett's face drained of color, his hand slowly withdrawing. Leonard stayed calm, heart pounding, realizing that this confrontation had now become a national story waiting to happen. Leonard addressed the witnesses, his voice steady. Luz, Clara, Omar, thank you for speaking up. Thank you for not staying silent. This is how patterns end. If someone had filmed me 10 years ago, maybe things would have been different for the others. Across social media, the video Clara uploaded went viral within hours. Millions of eyes watched as a black man in a business suit, clearly working, clearly calm, was almost handcuffed for moving into his own home. The caption read simply, Chicago cop arrests black man in his own home, 2023. Meanwhile, Ethan Hayes, Leonard's son, watched the clip from his dorm room at DePaul University. He called his father, voice shaking. Dad, are you okay? What if you weren't the chief? Would you be in jail? Leonard's jaw tightened. Probably yes, he admitted quietly. And that's the problem we're facing. Black people being criminalized for existing, for simply showing up in a place they belong. His wife, Monica Hayes, found him later in the kitchen, phone still in hand. She put a gentle hand on his shoulder. 28 years together, she whispered. You've served, you've protected. This was supposed to be our fresh start, and this is how Chicago greets you. By that evening, national news picked up the story. Mayor Karen Fields held an emergency press conference. What happened is unacceptable. Full investigation underway. Officer Bennett has been suspended. The Chicago Fraternal Order of Police released a statement defending Bennett. Officer followed protocol. Detainee refused lawful orders. Public outrage erupted online and on the streets. Protesters held signs. Badge NO. 3492 equals pay TERN. If it happened to the chief, imagine what happens to us. The FBI's Civil Rights Division opened an investigation. Internal Affairs flagged 47 similar complaints from Bennett's district over the past 5 years. All involved black men. All had been dismissed without discipline. Leonard had witnessed the system protecting repeat offenders. But now, with evidence, with witnesses, with the world watching, something had to change. That night, Leonard Hayes sat in the dark living room of his new home, the city lights outside shining faintly. He thought of the men Bennett had stopped over the years. Men with no badge, no institutional power, no one filming. Men whose encounters never made national headlines. And he realized this fight was bigger than one officer, one arrest. Tomorrow, Leonard whispered to himself, we begin the real work. The next morning, Leonard Hayes woke to the sound of his phone buzzing relentlessly. Alerts from every major news outlet, social media notifications, and messages from colleagues and friends flooded the screen. Chicago, the nation, and now the world were watching. The video of his near arrest on North Orchard Street had gone viral overnight. Millions of views, thousands of comments, and a flood of outrage. He took a deep breath, brushing off the exhaustion of the previous day. Monica entered the kitchen, coffee in hand, her face tight with concern. You need to be careful, she said softly. They're going to come at you from every angle. The department, the unions, the media. Everyone has an opinion. I know, Leonard replied, taking the cup. But we can't let this stop here. This isn't about me. It's about every person who's been profiled, harassed, or treated like they don't belong. This is bigger than Lincoln Park. Bigger than Badge No. 3492. This is about the system. Across town, Ryan Bennett sat in his small apartment in the suburbs, coffee cooling in front of him. His hands shook as he scrolled through the news. Fired? Suspension pending? Social media tearing him apart. His wife, Sarah, sat silently, trying not to react as Bennett muttered excuses, defenses, and disbelief. I was just doing my job. I didn't know. I thought. Sarah finally shook her head. You didn't know because you never questioned yourself. 9 years, Ryan. 6 complaints, all involving black men. And now, your first mistake goes viral, and everyone knows what you've been doing. Bennett looked away, face pale. For the first time, he realized the consequences weren't just coming. They were here. He had lost the shield he always counted on, the ability of the system to protect him. Meanwhile, Leonard arrived at CPD headquarters. Cameras swarmed as he walked through the lobby. Journalists called his name, their questions shouted over one another. Leonard ignored them for now, focusing on the task at hand. A full audit of the department, starting with District 18, Bennett's district. He knew what he had to do. Systemic change required hard evidence. Numbers, complaints, patterns. He had built his career studying exactly this. Sergeant Naomi Clark met him in the hallway. Sir, she said quietly, the internal reports we've compiled on District 18. It's worse than I thought. Bennett isn't an outlier. He's part of a pattern. And these complaints, they've all been dismissed over the years. Leonard nodded. That's why we start here. We document. We expose the failure points. And we ensure accountability. Not just for Bennett, but for everyone like him. The system protects repeat offenders. We're going to change that. Back on North Orchard Street, Luz Rivera watched the empty townhouse from the sidewalk, reflecting on the events of the previous day. I've seen this before, he told a neighbor. A Villian review and immediate reforms to ensure this never happens again. Mayor Fields nodded, her expression grim. Superintendent Hayes, I support your plan. The public is outraged. They want change. But be prepared. The unions will push back. Some of your officers will resist. There will be headlines calling this political, overreach, media circus. We need the evidence, and we need transparency. Leonard's phone buzzed again. Ethan Hayes was calling. Dad, I just saw the footage again. People are saying it's proof that racism doesn't exist here, that it's isolated incidents, but we know what really happened. Are you okay? I'm fine, Ethan, Leonard said, though his jaw tightened. But I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for everyone who's never had the power to push back. Meanwhile, Bennett faced a growing storm. His social media was flooded with criticism, including comments from former colleagues and law enforcement professionals calling his behavior unacceptable. Internal Affairs began reviewing every detail from past complaints. Badge No. 3492, one investigator muttered, shaking his head. This isn't just one incident. There's a pattern. In a quiet moment, Leonard visited the townhouse with Monica and Ethan. They walked through the rooms, arranging furniture, but their minds were elsewhere. Leonard paused at the living room window, looking down at the street. This neighborhood, he said softly, wasn't just bricks and trees. It's a test. If I can be profiled here, imagine everyone else who has no badge, no power, no one watching. That's why this matters. At that same moment, Bennett's former precinct saw protests growing outside. Signs with phrases like badge NO, 3492 equals PATTERM, and if it happened to the chief, imagine what happens to us, blocked the streets. Local news broadcast live from the scene. Officers watched from behind barricades, some shaking their heads, others avoiding eye contact. Back at headquarters, Leonard held a press briefing. Cameras clicked, microphones extended. "I've spent 26 years in law enforcement," he said, voice calm but firm. "I've trained officers, written policies, and fought for reforms. And yet, yesterday, one officer almost arrested me for moving into my own home. That is the reality Black Americans face every single day." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We're not just going to fire the officer, although that's part of it. We're going to review every complaint, every stop, every instance of misconduct in District 18. We're going to make systemic change, because dignity without enforcement is just words on paper." The room remained silent, reporters jotting notes, cameras flashing. Leonard's words were more than a statement. They were a challenge to the department, the city, and the nation. As night fell over Lincoln Park, Bennett sat in his apartment, staring at the ceiling. He realized this wasn't going away. His career was over, his reputation in ruins. For the first time, he understood that accountability had finally caught up. And Leonard Hayes? He had already moved on, planning reforms, rallying witnesses, and building a case that would ripple far beyond Chicago. And somewhere in the background, Clara Bennett's video continued to circulate online. Millions watching, millions commenting, millions demanding justice. The question hung in the air like smoke. If this could happen to the police superintendent, what chance does anyone else have? The morning after the protests, Leonard Hayes returned to the CPD headquarters with a renewed sense of purpose. The hallways buzzed with whispers and sideways glances. Officers who had previously ignored him now watched as if anticipating his next move. Leonard had made it clear. Badge no. 3492 wasn't just one officer. They were starting with him, but the audit would sweep through the entire district. He entered the conference room where internal affairs reports lay open on the table, spreadsheets of complaints and encounters covering the past 5 years. Leonard scanned the data. 47 complaints for Ryan Bennett. 91% involved Black men. No discipline. Zero accountability. Every statistic told the same story. Unchecked bias, repeated misconduct, systemic failure. Sergeant Naomi Clark spoke first. "Sir, some officers are already talking about union pushback. They say you're overreaching, that this isn't the time for reforms." Leonard's voice was calm but firm. "We're not asking permission. We're enforcing standards that should have been followed decades ago. The video is only one of many instances. If we don't act now, the next person, someone without a badge, without a law degree, without a witness filming, will suffer the same way." Meanwhile, Ryan Bennett sat at his lawyer's office, hands trembling as his attorney detailed the consequences. "Your suspension is official. Federal investigators have flagged your entire history. Internal Affairs is reviewing every stop you've made in the past 9 years. And the press isn't letting this go." Bennett's face went pale. "But I was just doing my job. I followed protocol." "Protocol doesn't excuse bias, Ryan. You've built a pattern of targeting Black men. 9 years. 6 complaints. 47 documented victims. And now you're the national example of what not to do." Back at Leonard's office, he called a private meeting with Mayor Karen Fields and other city officials. "We need a consent decree," he said. "Federal oversight. Use of force reforms. Mandatory anti-profiling checklists. Civilian review boards. Transparency. Public reporting. If we don't put these systems in place, nothing changes." The mayor nodded slowly. "I support you, Leonard. But the unions will resist. Expect lawsuits, threats, and heavy media scrutiny. Some officers will try to sabotage your reforms. Leonard leaned forward, determination etched into his face. Then we document everything. Every officer, every stop. This isn't about politics. It's about justice. At the same time, Leonard visited North Orchard Street to speak with witnesses who had filmed the viral arrest. Luz Rivera handed him the lease paperwork for Unit 6C. Clara Bennett shared the footage from her phone. Omar Lewis described the timeline of events and called attention to the officers' behavior. Leonard absorbed every detail, realizing that their actions would be pivotal in forcing accountability. Later that afternoon, he met privately with Ryan Bennett, who had been summoned to headquarters under the guise of routine questioning. Leonard stood across from him in a stark conference room. "Ryan," Leonard began calmly, "you understand why you're here, correct?" Bennett shifted in his chair, trying to mask fear with bravado. "Sir, I didn't know it was you. I was just doing my job." Leonard's eyes narrowed. "Doing your job? For 9 years, you've stopped black men across District 18 under the guise of routine policing. 6 complaints. 47 victims. None of your actions were ever disciplined. Do you understand what that means?" Bennett opened his mouth, but no words came. "It means," Leonard continued, voice rising slightly, "that the system has failed. And yesterday, when you tried to arrest me in my own home, you didn't just violate policy. You violated civil rights. You saw a black man exist in a neighborhood you didn't think he belonged, and you acted on that assumption. That is racial profiling, and I wrote the manual on how to prevent it." Bennett swallowed hard. I didn't mean. You didn't ask. You didn't verify. You didn't care to know. And that is the problem, Ryan. That is exactly why systemic change is necessary." Leonard turned toward the door. "Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay. Your record will be flagged, and your career in law enforcement is over. Every department in Illinois will be alerted. Badge no. 3492 will never patrol a street again." Bennett's face went white. His protest died in his throat as he realized the full weight of what had happened. He had assumed immunity, protection, and silence. All of it was gone. Meanwhile, protests continued outside CPD headquarters. Signs demanded accountability. Chants echoed, "Badge NO. 3492 must go. And if it pping to the chief, I'm majing US." Leonard addressed the crowd briefly, urging calm but reinforcing his commitment to reform. "We are implementing oversight, transparency, and mandatory anti-profiling measures. This is only the beginning." Back in his office, Leonard compiled a comprehensive plan for city council approval. Quarterly reports on stops, public review boards with subpoena power, mandatory anti-profiling training, and strict enforcement of disciplinary action for officers who repeated misconduct. He called it Project Accountability, a blueprint to prevent future abuses. That evening, Leonard returned home to Monica and Ethan. Monica looked at him, exhausted but resolute. "Are you sure this won't backfire?" Leonard sat down heavily. "It might. Some officers will resist. Some will threaten. But if we don't act, nothing changes. And yesterday proved it. A black man can exist in this neighborhood, do everything right, and still be treated like a criminal. We can't let that stand." Ethan, leaning against the counter, shook his head. "I watched the footage again. Dad, I can't believe how calm you were. Most people would have panicked, yelled, or even struggled. You let them see exactly what happens when you don't have power. It's terrifying." Leonard put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "And that's why we fight. Not just for me or for you, but for every person who doesn't have a voice. Every person who's been stopped, questioned, or harassed for simply existing. Across town, Bennett received a call from an officer at a neighboring precinct. Ryan, people are talking. Your name is everywhere. There's no way to fix this. The department's moving fast. You're finished. He sank into his chair, the gravity of the situation pressing down. His wife tried to console him, but even she knew nothing could undo what had happened. He had become the national example of misconduct, and his attempts to defend himself only highlighted the system's failures. The next day, City Council convened a special session to review Leonard's proposals. News cameras captured officers arriving, some supportive, some visibly upset. Leonard presented data, witness testimony, and the viral video. Council members murmured as they realized the depth of the issue. This isn't just one bad officer, Leonard said, voice firm, echoing in the chamber. It's a pattern of behavior that has gone unchecked for years. We can't rely on complaints being dismissed or hope that accountability will appear. We must build a system where bias cannot hide, where misconduct is impossible to ignore, and where justice doesn't depend on who you are or what you look like. By the end of the session, preliminary approval was given for oversight measures and anti-profiling reforms. The media reported the news immediately, praising Leonard's leadership, but also noting the uphill battle against entrenched resistance within the department. As night fell over Chicago, Leonard looked out from his new home again, lights flickering across Lincoln Park. The fight was just beginning. The viral arrest had sparked outrage, but reforms would require persistence, courage, and unwavering commitment. Bennett's career was over, but thousands of other officers still patrolled the streets, and Leonard knew some would resist, undermine, or ignore the new rules. One thought echoed in his mind. If Badge No. 3492 could profile the superintendent, what happens to everyone else on the streets, every day, without cameras, without witnesses, without power? The following morning, Leonard Hayes stood before the press at CPD headquarters, flanked by Monica and Ethan. Cameras from every major network were trained on him. Journalists crowded the room, scribbling notes and shouting questions, but Leonard remained calm, resolute, and unwavering. The viral arrest had forced the world to watch, but this moment was about shaping the future. I've been a police officer for 26 years, Leonard began, voice steady, projecting confidence. I've trained officers, written policies, and testified before Congress about police reform. Yet yesterday, one officer nearly arrested me for simply moving into my own home. That is the reality millions of Black Americans face every single day, powerless, afraid, and unjustly targeted. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned in, and microphones recorded every syllable. My son, Ethan, watched that video. He is 20 years old, studying law, and wants to fight for justice. He called me crying, asking, if I weren't the police superintendent, would I be in jail right now? The honest answer is, probably yes. That's why we must change the system. Leonard turned slightly, acknowledging the officers in the room who had been silent witnesses, and those who feared retaliation for speaking up. Effective immediately, the Chicago Police Department is implementing the following reforms: a civilian oversight board with subpoena power, mandatory body camera review for any stop resulting in a complaint, an anti-profiling checklist for every officer after each stop, and quarterly public reports on all police interactions with the community. Outside, protesters cheered. Their signs read, Badge No. 3492 equals pattern, and justice without power is not justice. Across the city, similar demonstrations erupted, demanding accountability for officers like Ryan Bennett. Meanwhile, the FBI's Civil Rights Division concluded their investigation into Bennett. The findings were damning. A consistent pattern of racial profiling, failure of supervision, and repeated dismissals of complaints without proper review. Though federal criminal charges were not filed, intent was difficult to prove. The recommendation for reforms was unequivocal. Chicago PD needed federal oversight, systemic accountability, and mandatory training for officers on bias and conduct. Bennett faced the consequences swiftly. The acting superintendent, in coordination with city leadership, terminated him for misconduct, racial profiling, and false arrest. The police union appealed, but arbitration upheld the decision. Bennett's pension was forfeited, and he was barred from all law enforcement positions in Illinois. He had become the example of what happens when a bad officer finally meets a system that refuses to protect him. His personal life unraveled quickly. Sarah filed for divorce, unable to cope with the national embarrassment and moral scrutiny. His children faced bullying and social ostracization. Bennett moved to a low-paying warehouse job in Gary, Indiana, with no chance of returning to law enforcement. Back at Lincoln Park, Leonard and his family began settling into their new home, but the work was far from over. He convened meetings with city officials, community leaders, and CPD administrators to ensure the reforms were implemented thoroughly. Leonard knew that systemic change required continuous effort, not one viral moment. Ethan, now more determined than ever, joined his father in advocacy. "Dad, we need to make sure this doesn't just fix one district," he said. "We need statewide policies, national standards, and something that prevents the next officer from becoming badge no." 3492. Monica added quietly, "And we need support for families. People who've been profiled, harassed, or abused by the system. They need counseling, legal aid, and validation. The reforms alone aren't enough." Leonard nodded. "Exactly. We fight at every level, city, state, and federal. We use data, witness testimony, training, and accountability to prevent this from happening again. And we start by documenting everything. Every stop, every complaint, every policy violation." As the reforms rolled out, CPD District 18 became the national case study for anti-profiling procedures. Officers were trained to follow the checklist, body camera footage was routinely reviewed, and complaints were treated with transparency. Other cities took notice. Departments in Illinois and across the U.S. adopted similar oversight policies, inspired by the Hayes case. Yet, Leonard never forgot the human cost. He met privately with victims from Bennett's past stops, listening to their experiences, acknowledging the fear and injustice they had endured, and promising tangible support. These meetings were emotional, some bringing tears, some anger, but all reinforcing why this fight mattered. Clara Bennett, the retired teacher who filmed the viral video, spoke publicly for the first time. "If Leonard Hayes could be arrested in his own home, think about everyone else who isn't protected, who doesn't have the system on their side." This video wasn't just about one officer. It was about every person who experiences injustice quietly, every day. Luis Rivera, the concierge, finally felt a sense of relief. "I've seen it too many times," he said. "Now, maybe, Black residents don't have to live in fear of being treated like criminals in their own homes." In Washington, D.C., the case inspired lawmakers to draft bills enhancing accountability and oversight for police officers nationwide. The Hayes Act, as some called it, proposed mandatory reporting, federal review of civil rights violations, and a national misconduct database to prevent fired officers from moving freely between departments. Across the city, the story of Badge No. 3492 became a symbol, a cautionary tale of unchecked power and the need for systemic reform. Leonard Hayes continued leading CPD with an unshakable focus on fairness, transparency, and accountability. The reforms he implemented became the blueprint for other cities, ensuring that no viral moment would be needed for justice to prevail. As the sun set over Lincoln Park, Leonard sat on the porch of his townhouse. Monica beside him, Ethan leaning against the railing. The street was quiet, the neighborhood alive but peaceful. Leonard thought back to the day he was nearly arrested. The fear, the calm, the powerlessness he felt. It had all led to this moment. Not revenge, not spectacle, but change. I never expected it would get this far, Monica said softly. It's not about what I expected, Leonard replied. It's about what was needed. Every person who's been stopped unjustly, every man or woman who's lived in fear. They're the reason we do this. And we won't stop. Not now, not ever. Ethan added, Dad, this is bigger than Chicago. We're setting a national example. Leonard smiled faintly. Yes, and we must keep pushing. Because if it could happen to me, to the police superintendent, it could happen to anyone. Meanwhile, Ryan Bennett's name became synonymous with misconduct. His story was included in training programs nationwide as an example of what not to do. The warehouse job, the public shame, and the loss of career were permanent reminders. Actions have consequences, and the law protects those without power, not just those with badges. Across social media, millions had shared the original video. Millions had demanded justice. But Leonard knew that change required more than shares. It required action, enforcement, and persistence. He leaned back, looking at the lights of the city below. Chicago was far from perfect, but today it had taken a step forward. One viral video, one calm response, and the courage to confront a system that often protects the wrong people had created ripples across the nation. The Hayes family stood together, the weight of responsibility balanced by hope. Leonard Hayes had turned a near arrest into a turning point, not just for himself or Chicago,